But let's move on. We're going to transition to the NFL draft. We've done a lot of free agent profiles. We've done a couple of draft profiles as well. And my guy, John, this seems to kind of be, I don't want to speak for you, this seems to be kind of one of, if not maybe your dude in this class, at least for the Bengals at 18. And he's one of the most intriguing guys because of the athletic profile, limited snaps, all kinds of different things, but the size, the positional need, especially long-term, and the developmental possibilities with this player are huge. So we'll say that. John, who you got for us on our 2024 rookie profile this week? You're muted.
Really felt good about that intro too. What a nice word to use though in regards to huge, because that is exactly who the player I want to talk about. It seems like there are going to be, let's call it 3 prototype right tackles that the Bengals have a chance of drafting with the 18th overall pick. It's not a guarantee that all 3 of them are going to be there, but you're talking a guy we've talked about, Talisi Fuaga, J.C. Latham out of Alabama, and Amarius Mims out of Georgia. And when identifying all 3 of these guys and really breaking them down, Amarius Mims to me feels like he checks the boxes that the Bengals look for and the boxes that the Bengals need. And in comparing these guys, first of all, they're all big, right? Like size is not an issue with any of these young lads to play the right tackle position. It's traditionally a position where you prefer size rather than athleticism, even though that's a little bit more archaic in and of itself. So how does Mims separate himself between all 3 of these guys? And I think for starters, he is a splitting image of who the Bengals currently have at both offensive tackle spots. He's 6'8", 340 pounds, 36-inch arms, 11-inch hands. That's essentially the same size as Orlando Brown and Trent Brown, if you will. So, and I don't think that the Bengals only want tackles who are literal skyscrapers. I think with Orlando Brown and Trent Brown, both of them kind of fell into their laps and they kind of ran with it. But there is something to be said, I think, about signing a guy in Orlando Brown to the contract that they did and then taking on another similar body type a year later. I think there's something to be said about the comfortability of taking on guys who are built like that, who are obviously very rare in their body types. So I think even if this isn't the exact type the Bengals want at offensive tackle, though the evidence may speak contrary to that, I think they're still comfortable with adding another player of this size. And his size is more similar to Latham because Latham is also over 340 pounds. Fuaga's 320 pounds. It's not like he's a small man by any means. I think the difference is in length, whereas Mims has 36-inch arms, and there's no question about can he hold up a tackle. I think with Fuaga, the 33 and an eighth-inch arms, it sometimes does show up on film. There's a question about is the ceiling higher at guard. I think all those things kind of factor into it. On top of the fact that we did see the length issues, they did pop up with Jonah Williams, and they did give him some trouble against the more elite pass rushers. So when it comes to then Mims versus Latham, like the size doesn't differentiate either of them from one another. They both come from SEC backgrounds. They both played against high competition. Where does Mims separate himself there? And this is where the Bengals haven't really shown to value high-end athleticism in their offensive alignment as much in recent years, but it's where they need him the most. It's where they need to deviate or just venture down that path the most. Because we talked about this, Anthony, back in November. This is the least athletic offensive line, definitely in the AFC, but probably in the entire NFL as well. And it's one of the reasons why you had situations where Joe Burrow is getting, pressured horrendously against AFC North defensive lines because you have 5 middling athletes, and Trent Brown doesn't really change this for you. You still have 5 middling athletes who are trying to work together, and that creates a lot of problems when you're dropping back 40 times against really elite and high-end athletes at defensive end and defensive tackle. Myles Garrett and TJ Watt, on top of the fact that they're incredibly strong and great technicians, they're freak athletes. They explode off of the line, and you need elite movers at the tackle position to really gain an edge against some of these guys. And I think even if Frank Pollock has been here for a handful of years now, and they haven't invested a ton in pure high-end athletes like what Frank Pollock did invest with the Dallas Cowboys, and what he was a part of building that offensive line to where it got with Tyron Smith and Zach Martin and Travis Frederick and even Lyle Collins. He knows the value of having great athletes at that position, and he did talk about that with Dave Lapham here a couple weeks ago, and I want to share that clip of just him talking about just the size and the athleticism of Mims and how special that is. And we're going to share that here in a quick second.
Yeah, this is Dave Lapham's show by First Star Logistics, right?
Yes.
And so we'll put this up here. I want to make sure we credit that where credit is due, but yeah, go for it.
Mims out of Georgia, coach.
He fits in that freak category. Like they shouldn't make human beings that size that can move like him. He's insane. He's maybe a little bit limited as far as playing experience. So it's all his best football is all still to come and ahead of him. But
like Munoz.
Yeah.
I mean, he was hurt. He was hurt a lot at SC. This kid had some injury issues. I mean, man, if the football gods say we're going to leave you alone, you're going to be healthy. Woo.
Yeah, he is everything. Length, width. I mean, height, weight. He's another guy. There's no way. If you told me what he weighed, I was like, "There's no way." I mean,
crazy.
Act like you said is a great word. It's insane. Hand size. I mean, just humongous hands, and he ran like a 5.0 something in the field.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
Like, how's that possible? I mean,
No.
How is that possible? Honestly, like I'm with him. Like the athlete that Amarius Mims is rare, and if this were a guy that started 2+ years again at the SEC Georgia level and didn't have any injury issues in his past, he would not leave the top 10. Like that's where I find myself like really thinking about Amarius Mims at this point. The injury issues are definitely the biggest red flag in this profile because it's not on the field. On the field, everything is phenomenal, especially for a guy who's only played 800 snaps at the FBS level. Now, there's only been one other first-round pick at offensive tackle that's played that few amount of snaps. That's played under 1,000. That was Ryan Ramczyk. And that was only because he played at the D3 level before transferring to Wisconsin. But for a guy that, again, has only had 8 starts in his whole college career, he looks really technically sound. Like, I don't think that's the issue here. And I think teams are going to love, like, teams probably do love the tape that he's put on display. It is going to be the injuries, though. He had multiple ankle injuries during the 2023 season. He had the tightrope surgery. It took him out for 6 weeks. He strained his hamstring trying to work out at the combine, and he didn't work out at his pro day yet. So he has an incomplete testing profile, and he does have those medical red flags. So you're looking at a guy that, if he didn't have that, he would not be available for the Bengals to draft. But because of that, the Bengals probably are going to get a shot at him, maybe compared to even Latham and Fuaga in that sense. So if some team is going to take a chance on this risk, on these red flags that Mims has, that aren't really in his control, the Bengals are in a position to really do that compared to other teams because they have 2 starters for this season. And when you have Trent Brown, who can only really be counted on for about 500 snaps a season, because that's just the average that he's played over the past handful of years, you're probably not looking at a guy that can maybe make it the entire season. Maybe Mims can't make it the entire rookie season too. Maybe he needs a year to really fully develop his frame and make sure that he doesn't have these nagging injuries going forward. But if you can get a combined year out of Amarius Mims and Trent Brown, again, you're managing the same type of body type, but a superior athlete that for the long term can give you answers against the pests of menaces that you faced along the edge of the AFC North. I think this is the ideal landing spot for Amarius Mims to really get off the ground and make sure that his body is in order. And when he gets the chance, and he's probably going to get the chance if Trent Brown does go down this year, I think he can be a difference maker at the 18th pick that maybe they wouldn't get in other years. Maybe they wouldn't get in other prospects who didn't have these medical concerns.
So there's a lot to dissect here and a lot of things that you brought up that I want to kind of address. Number one, you talked about the issues that the Bengals have had along the offensive line with the athleticism, and that's the math bomb scores and all that kind of stuff. We've looked at those metrics with a lot of those guys, and they are low. At least they were when they were coming out of college. And some of that, a lot of that translates on tape when you go against the Pittsburghs, the Clevelands, and the Baltimores. 6 times a year, if not maybe 7 total, depending on how the season shakes out. And the other thing aside from having a Myles Garrett and a TJ Watt that are hyper athletic and they just can get off the snap so quickly, those 3 defenses are so versatile and so their looks are different in what they do and where they move certain players like a Myles Garrett. They can just continue to exploit. It's not just one continuous spot. They exploit mismatches across the entire offensive line. And so the Bengals kind of go into each one of those games a little bit with a handicap. And I say that saying that this is probably the most excited I've been about the Bengals offensive line as a whole since Joe Burrow's gotten here, right? I mean, so that is something that for sure needs to be addressed. And with Mims' athleticism, I think that handles that. The thing that I like about him, aside from the size and the athleticism, and like you said, extremely limited tape, but what's there is good. What the Bengals will like about it, and you touched on it a little bit, SEC, Georgia, hyper, just uber productive team, a team that wins a lot and beats a lot of good teams, that sort of thing. The Bengals are going to like that. And, you go up against the best competition and your team's going far every year and that sort of thing. They're going to like that. And they're going to like the mentality that a player like that brings to them. Another element, you mentioned, maybe Mims has to stay if they draft him and Brown goes down, because that's been, a thing with him here and there. Maybe it's a coupling of both of them to play the entire season with the Bengals. Yeah, that's maybe not super ideal, but if there is, what I like about this is the Bengals have two veteran guys who have been very, very good tackles in the league for a long time set right now. They're not going into the draft going, we are absolutely desperate for a right tackle. And this is a guy that screams to me, because of the lack of starts, developmental guy, right? And I mean that in the most positive sense of the word, not a guy that's like, oh man, he's a totally unfinished product. There's a lot to work with there, but with the limited amount of starts, the limited amount of snaps, that's something that I think appeals to the Bengals too, where we can say, hey, we've got time to groom this guy. And we have time to groom him behind two guys that, as you also mentioned, are very physically similar. So I think all of that is appealing. I think when you look at some things, there've been some tackle misses by the Bengals in a lot of, and Jonah Williams was not a tackle miss. He just wasn't a superstar or a star player for where he was drafted. But I mean, you can go back to Fisher and Obuehi, and I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and they try and find these guys. And, sometimes they're the more athletic guys like an Obuehi that they really, really thought was hyper athletic and could play a lot of different places on the offensive line. Never worked. Same with Jake Fisher, right? It was kind of like, well, we think we could put him in a lot of different places. Never worked. So I think this guy, like you said, is a true tackle, obviously with his size and everything. I think there is a lot that would appeal to the Cincinnati Bengals, not only as a player, but as a developmental guy to bring along and in this division. So I think in a lot of ways, this makes a ton of sense. There are some other guys that I think, with the extended tape and with more snaps under the belt that we've reviewed and we've seen even on this show, that I may lean to a little bit, but I think this is a guy that is very appealing.
I think, and I like how you just touched on just the specific type of developmental player that he is, because you're not really developing. Jesus, I can't really speak his technique at this point, because he is already a really good player, and he's proven that, over the course of his career, albeit very limited. So there's obviously tweaks and, growth he can still take, but it's really just developing his body. And I think that's the most important part about what his NFL journey is going to be. He is a rare player. Like, it's already rare enough to be that tall and that large and that dense. But when you're also extremely athletic like that's a rare body type that I think can kind of scare off some NFL teams. I think because you don't really see many examples, there's not a lot of precedents for him just thriving, or types of players like him thriving in the league. It may scare some teams, but the fact that the Bengals are at this point now familiar with this type of player, with this type of body, that gives them, I think, more of a peace of mind about how to handle it. And they're going to have Orlando Brown for the next 3 years. And yeah, it's just like, here, you got two guys who've lasted in the league very long at this size, which is very rare in of itself. Learn from them as much as you possibly can. And on top of all of this, right, the Bengals are picking 18th. Very obvious. I don't think that they plan on picking this high in the future. I think so long as Joe Burrow is healthy, they always expect to make the playoffs. They always expect to go deep in the playoffs. Picking in the teens, I don't think is going to be something that the Bengals will expect to do much of in the future. I would advise them to take advantage of that as much as you can. Get what I think is objectively a blue chip type talent that, yes, comes with risk, and that's why he's available at the 18th pick. But you will have a very hard time finding legitimately good offensive tackles drafting the 20s, or drafting outside of the first round entirely. The vast majority of the very good ones are picked as high as possible. And again, if Mims didn't have the specific and unlucky injury history that he has, he would not be available at the 18th. I think he would probably go definitely in the top 16, but he's here as like offensive tackle 6 or 5 on the consensus board. He might be going in the 20s for all we know, but I think what we do know is that the Bengals do have pretty significant interest in him. Frank Pollock obviously loves him. Like, that was not very hard to discern from, talking about him. He was smiling the entire time. They talked with him at the combine. They watched him
barely get out his words, man.
I know, man. He was enamored. Like, Frank Pollock has never had this type of athlete with him for the Bengals. He really wanted Frank Ragnow. They got swiped by the Detroit Lions. Obviously, Penei Sewell was their top tackle, another freak athlete who was huge and technically sound. A lot of people give Frank Pollock a lot of crap for maybe the lack of developing late-round offensive linemen, but a true swing at a true first-round player whose tape and athleticism and size and pedigree screams this guy has not only a really high ceiling, but a higher floor than people can expect. I think this is the type of swing that the Bengals need to make here. They need difference makers in the first round, and I think Amarius Mims can be that.
So you kind of read my mind a little bit, about you had Lapham kind of pie in the sky thinking, as he always is, Mr. Positive, and I love it. Talking about, well, Munoz came out that way, and that's very true. We've had Anthony Munoz on the show, and he talked about the fact that, man, I didn't get to play a lot later in my career, and how, he didn't think he was maybe going to be drafted as high as he was or should have been because of his overall talent, just because he's missed a lot of time. And the Bengals took a big, in a lot of ways, took a big risk on that, and it paid off as literally the best offensive tackle to ever play. So I get the line of thinking, and I get kind of where Lap's going with this, but and you kind of mentioned a little bit. I still like Frank Pollock. I like the demeanor and a lot of different things that he brings to this team and in his offensive line. But as you mentioned, and as you look across the Bengals offensive line, 4 of the 5 projected starters so far at this point are free agents they had to go get somewhere else. And so the lack of development, and yes, you are correct. There's been a lot of mid-round guys, your Michael Jordans and your, all these players that they've, it's like, hey, kind of mold these guys a little bit. There has been a Jackson Carman in there. I mean, that was a 2nd round pick, but you're right. There hasn't been a top 20 investment, and really we knocked the development. You mentioned a couple of names there that he liked. He didn't get the chance to draft the guys that he probably had, between Jamar Chase being the guy that the team wanted and needed. I assume if he was not there, Sewell for sure would have been the guy, and Sewell would have been great for the team, right? And so you figure, okay, he probably would have had a nice tackle there. And then, of course, Ragnow earlier, who it's funny, both those guys are on the Lions, but again, a guy that he just kind of had to go on a fallback option for when Ragnow left and they went to Billy Price. So there's a little bit of, you got to think nuanced with this a little bit, but the development thing is there. And that's what worries me a tiny bit with this guy, because he will need some developmental time given the lack of college reps, college starts, but the tools are there.
Yeah, and good news, the Lions are picking, 29th? I don't think they're picking in front of the Bengals this time.
You would hope.
But yeah, like, he's going to be, I think, he's 21 right now. He's going to turn 22 during the season. In general, no matter how good you are as a tackle coming out of college, even Penei Sewell was needed some time and seasoning before. Now he's an all-pro. He's arguably the best right tackle in the NFL. That was an easy evaluation. I think Mims is very similar in terms of just, he looks it on tape. And if he just stays healthy, if he lands in the right spot, he can be just as good. And I think that's why the Bengals are very interested in him. And if I were to say right now, we're still a month out, if he's available and there's not like a Byron Murphy or a Quinyon Mitchell or one of the top receivers just staring at them in the face, I really do think he's going to be the pick. So we'll see.
We'll see. Good breakdown from John on Amarius Mims, the George Big Man. We'll see what the Bengals end up doing there, but another rookie profile and a prospect the Bengals could look at pick 18. Definitely, I would think he's on their short list, especially with how this draft may fall. probably going to be pretty quarterback heavy, especially early in this class. We'll see what happens there. And then, the Bengals may have the pick of a number of guys that are very, very high on their list. We'll see what's going to happen.